the growing pressure to protect customer data isn't just a problem for the IT department. Increased security budgets and growing incidents are putting CFOs directly in the crosshairs. In this panel, we'll examine how cybersecurity is affecting budgets, how to calculate risk, and how incident costs reactively versus proactively put pressure on budgets. Please welcome my panel, Jack Huffard, I beg your pardon, the Chief Operating Officer of Tenable, Jeanette, Chief Financial Officer for Massachusetts Executive Office of Technology Services, Jim Burgess, Deputy CISO of the Mandarin Oriental Hotel Group. Now, we didn't include him in the panel because we are hosting the event here. That's not the case. So that's great. I'm really passionate about this topic simply because this is cybersecurity is a boardroom discussion right now. It's a business risk. And I want to probably start off with you, Jack, given that you're involved with, day-to-day happenings of a cybersecurity company. You are seeing the nature of attacks are constantly changing. But no one vendor can do this inexpensively. There is a big vendor sprawl when it comes to cybersecurity. Every company is using 50-plus solutions. So how does a CFO allocate budget, to so many companies? How should they go about identifying which are the critical companies that they should be, investing in to protect this cyber risk?
So that's a good question. I'm really glad I'm not a CFO. But I've learned a lot from the CFOs that I've gotten to know, and I think that there's a what you say is true, and I think the panel will agree with me that most companies we talk to, the CISOs are dealing with anywhere between 50 and 100, depending on how large you are, different security technologies just to get your arms around the enterprise risk. And I think that there is a movement to consolidation. You're seeing a lot more platform opportunities with regard to that. But I also think, as we had heard from the other two panels, there's a lot of new technology out there to take advantage of to grow your business faster. But that new technology is still being developed or tried to be secured by traditional methods. And I think there's a new, what we're calling a cyber exposure gap that's out there, where you have these cloud assets, you have these IoT assets, and everybody wants to use their iPhone, they want to use the cloud, they probably have DevOps going on, but how do you get your arms around it? And I think you've got to really think through how you resource allocate people, process, the technology to secure the organization.
Jeanette, you want to elaborate on how you go about, selecting vendors when you are going through this budgeting process and thinking, okay, what should I allocate my security budget to, and what are the critical ones?
Certainly. So we are the technology services and operations for the Commonwealth of Mass. There's 152 agencies that operate in the Commonwealth, and we are consolidating all of the security services under our executive office. We are actually reducing our spend on core computing services by moving to the cloud. We're reducing our capital investments by about 25% by no longer needing to replace hardware. And we are taking the 40% reduction approximately in our operating data centers. And we're taking that money and we are using that from a budgetary perspective to invest in these security initiatives. In order to select vendors, we are actually mandated by the Commonwealth to utilize strategic sourcing, and we have to go out to competitive bid. We internally create strategic sourcing teams that have subject matter expertise. So whether it's investing in data analytics tools, security tools, endpoint protection tools, encryption tools, we have specific strategic sourcing teams that evaluate the vendors that are in that vertical.
That's great. And Jim, I mean, obviously you are, managing, you're the CFO of such a big hotel chain. How do you go about assessing cybersecurity risk on a day-to-day basis? Like, does that keep changing? Has it changed over the last 2 years? Just give us some thoughts around that.
Yeah, it changes month to month, and as you're analyzing new products and tools and services to bring into the organization, sometimes by the time you've analyzed those tools and services, those aren't the tools and services you want to implement. There's a different risk that's there. So it's constantly changing. But one thing I'd recommend, and I can't tell you exactly what Mandarin does, but what the hospitality industry does in general, the CISOs do, is have risk assessments done at different hotels or whatever your business is at those locations to really understand if the threat actor can get to your most important information, which is most likely to be compromised, and which information will have the highest impact. So that's where you want to focus. You also want to look at things like the Verizon data breach report, which comes out every year. It's very specific on which type of threats are out there and which vulnerabilities are being attacked within your organization or whatever sector you're in. So you can see the pattern throughout that year and what you need to be addressing first. So this year, Verizon has mentioned credentials. Just basic password and usernames are being captured by the bad guys. It's patching that's not done timely. You need a good product like a Tenable that identifies the vulnerabilities that you've got out there, but not only identifies them, but lets you know how to remediate them very quickly. And then you need to have good training and awareness programs. And that's something else where the money needs to be spent, because phishing and social engineering is the third biggest reason for breaches.
That makes a lot of sense. So again, in terms of your allocation, and you don't have to get into the specifics, but do you see a change in how you were allocating, let's say, a portion of your security budget to firewalls or identity management, or so are there new areas that have come about in the last maybe 1 year or 2 years that you're finding new budget for?
Sure. A couple of years ago, ransomware hit lots of different companies, and the city of Atlanta just recently, unfortunately, and there's still an uptick in that. So spending money on good backup programs, making sure you've got your backups in order, they're tested on a regular basis in case you're hit with ransomware. Another big kind of buzzword, next-gen firewalls have come out recently, the last 2 years. But if you look at the Verizon data breach report and some of the other literature in the market, protecting the endpoints and protecting your credentials with multi-factor authentication is most important. So if you look at the risks and those vulnerabilities that are identified in the threat assessments at your companies, that's where you need to focus on spending the money. And the other thing is, Gartner came out saying about 5.6% of the IT spend is on security and compliance. If you're in that range between 4 and 7%, or if you're on the sweet spot at 5.6%, doesn't necessarily mean that you're spending the money the way it should be spent. So reevaluate that. If you're the CFO and you see that your company's spending 10 or 12%, don't assume that you're all set in the security space. That money might be spent in the wrong areas.
And Jeanette, in your case, do you have like a benchmark, an industry benchmark as to how that you compare yourself, to others, or try to identify, okay, am I allocating enough to, certain products? Is there a benchmark that people can refer to, or is it all what you think is the right way to go about it?
So no, we try to monitor and review industry standards. Our motivation, of course, is not generating revenue. It's providing and securing the constituents in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which is a pretty big responsibility. Our focus is on data, the correct transfer of data, and with the advancement of AI and machine learning, we have a particular focus in ensuring that we properly govern data. So that's a very big focus for us. Another big focus, as you mentioned, is endpoint security and securing our user base. So there's approximately 68,000 employees in the Commonwealth, and we're standardizing our end user devices because the single biggest vulnerability for any of your organizations are actually your users. And so having standard desktops that are patched in a timely manner, there's a security analyst, Roger Grimes, who indicated that about 80% of the ransomware breaches happen 6 months after the vulnerabilities are already aware in the market and published. So that's a pretty bad statistic. So if you can standardize your end user devices, you can train your staff to not be vulnerable to phishing. You do multi-factor authentication. We've upgraded to O365 for the same reason, so that all of our end users have a standard secure tool in which data is encrypted, and it allows us to better protect the PII information, the health information, the tax information that we have of the people who live in Massachusetts.
And Jack, I want to come back to this whole vendor fragmentation aspect. Obviously, you are focusing on certain aspect of security breaches. You're trying to develop a solution to protect certain type of attacks. Some other vendors are doing it, on the endpoint side. You may be doing it, on the vulnerability side or network side. Do you guys, among the vendors or, the customers that you have, do you believe in sharing threat information between the vendors or between your customers? Or is it more like, okay, I'm going to look at your problem, try to fix problem for this industry or other industries? Talk us about the sharing aspect.
So I think the sharing aspect is a very interesting one. There's been a lot of debate with regard to information sharing in general at the federal level between DHS, DoD, and enterprise. That's one area of conversation, and I know that Obama started something, and it's continuing, but it's not as robust as it should be. With regard to security products, and I'd love to hear y'all's comments on this, there should be APIs that work between threat products, vulnerability products, and then what I would call IT products that allow you to do the remediation. And the closer you can get to automating that process, the better. But the larger the organization you have, the less likely you're going to just go automatically patch something. You want to make sure that if you're putting that on 10,000 or 100,000 systems, that you test it first before it goes out. So I think shrinking the gap of exposure is really big. And I'll go back to what they said earlier. It's so true that if you do a really good job of cyber hygiene, two-factor authentication, understanding your vulnerability state, patch, and you do security awareness, that's a lot of where your spend should be in making sure the processes are out there. Once you understand your state, then you can start to build in the other technologies that can transform you from where you are today to where you want to be from a secure perspective.
That's great. And so I guess the fact that these threats can be eliminated, you can protect against all the, the new kind of attacks that keep happening. Jim, I want to go back to you. How do you kind of mitigate the risk? Do you go for cyber insurance, or what are the ways you are trying to mitigate the cyber risk at the end of the day?
It's fairly simple. In the information security world, you're taught you can either accept the risk, you can mitigate the risk, or you transfer it to insurance. If the information is highly sensitive or critical, then you're most likely going to mitigate and transfer some of that risk to insurance. If it's less so, then maybe it's something that you just don't address at all.
Is the insurance getting more expensive by the day, or?
It's the premiums are getting more accurate. It's still fairly new, fairly new business. So yeah.
Okay, Jeanette, do you want to elaborate on cyber insurance? Any thoughts around that?
Sure. We're not leveraging cyber insurance, and even though the bad guys are getting smarter and faster day by day, I think in the time it took me to say this sentence, by the end of 2019, they say there's going to be a ransomware attack every 4 seconds. So our focus is on monitoring. Our focus is on monitoring network operations. We're standing up a security operations center, and then we're shifting those budgetary savings from moving to the cloud into investing in the appropriate tools to be able to do penetration testing and monitoring real time so that we can mitigate as much of the risk as possible.
And Jack, you are the product guy, so I'm going to ask you, how can these guys quantify their cyber risk? Are you developing tools to like as asked before, benchmark, the cyber risk across industries, across, large size, small size customers, anything that?
Yes, so as a vendor, and we just turned 16 years old last September and grew up as a vulnerability management firm. We identified vulnerable systems and helped you move through a process of patching them. And like most companies, we're leveraging data science today, and we're looking at ways to do a couple of things. One, we've done a really good job, and the industry has done a good job of building a pile of data that says you're vulnerable, but not really helping you prioritize that data in fixing what's most critical to reduce your cyber risk. And I think that's a huge thing that we announced yesterday, actually, that's going to be rolling out in 2019. And then with regard to understanding how you compare to folks in your peer groups of your industries, we think we can bring something to bear which will allow you to say, how do I compare to other people in the financial world? How do I compare to people in the oil and gas? That's externally, but internally, how does my European unit look compared to my North American unit? And start to build benchmarks internally and externally, because I do think that as you progress as a firm and you try to get better and better, you may start off with a benchmark that may not be at where you want to be in your industry, but you can say to the board, we're here and we're going here, and then after this we're going to be in this. And look, as what I've learned from our CFO is that everything is in the context of a plan, annual plan, or and if you can't fit it into that plan, it doesn't get resourced. And if you don't have a plan as a CISO to communicate with a CFO, you're not going to get what you want. And I think that what we want to do is help the CISO communicate with the executives about how this is going to work over time.
That's great. And Jim, you mentioned, password is a big problem. It's very basic, but it continues to be a problem for a CISO. I can think of phishing as another big one where people keep clicking, bad URLs. So how much time do you think, or how much budget do you think a company should be spending on training? And what kind of training programs have you instituted or recommended to your CFO to educate the employees?
I don't think there's a specific amount or a certain percentage that you need to spend. It just needs to be consistent. You need to have monthly newsletters, different training sessions for particularly for administrators who have administrative privileges to allow access across the network. Training sessions, newsletters, and just constant awareness, phishing exercises that are done by outside firms, as well as they call it vishing, which is voice social engineering to try to gain access to your network. All of that needs to be done and repetitive.
Jeanette, you want to talk about training as well?
Sure. We actually, so our plan is a 2-year plan of consolidating the one network, securing our endpoints, and a big component of it is training our staff. And we have invested quite a bit of our budget for this fiscal year in training, in videos, in self-education. And I think you're right. The key is consistency. So there is a roadmap. There's a training roadmap so that there are constant reminders for the staff to execute those trainings.
And so, Jack, coming back to how we can, mitigate this problem using smarter, I guess, products, and is cloud something that is a panacea in this case, or a better network architecture, that a company should be thinking about to mitigate cyber risk?
I think you've got to rethink what your enterprise looks like, because it doesn't look like it did 10 years ago. You have things that are going to be on-prem that you're never going to move to the cloud. You have things that you're doing in the cloud that you're probably going to move over time. We're going to be in a hybrid world for quite a while, probably the next decade. But I do think the cloud is going to bring a lot more capability on the cyber side that will allow folks to be more secure. But It also brings to bear a lot of technologies you may have heard of, DevOps. Private cloud, public cloud, there's a lot of different, instantations of how you want to deploy the cloud. And even if you're in the cloud, you have to also have the right configurations. You've got to put the right applications. You've got to test those. You've got to, your costs can skyrocket if you don't mind, understand what's out there.
So I guess, we heard AI quite a bit in the previous panel. Data science is being talked about quite a bit. Just this whole aspect of gathering more data. Can that, is that creating more problems for us from a cybersecurity point of view? Or can that help solve the problem as well, capturing more data? And I want to actually go to all three panelists on that one, just because I keep hearing we are capturing more data, data science is the solution. Is that making us more vulnerable as a company, or even as individuals? Just the fact that there's more data being captured.
So from our perspective, we're going to use data in a way that's going to help every customer get smarter. Our algorithms about what is vulnerable, what is not, how those things progress over time, and you prioritize the vulnerabilities that you need to repair. I also think that you have to have, and I think the general counsels would say you have to have a data retention policy too. You don't want to hold on to data too long. But I think that it's a good thing. And the machine learning, anything that you can automate and put a human on a decision that has to be made that can't be learned by a machine is where I think productivity is really going to come from.
Jeanette?
Sure. So I just believe that policies need to be contemporary around data. So the more data you have, the more risk that there is going to be of a breach of data. So you absolutely have to take security steps around that. There needs to be a governance policy in place. That would be my recommendation. We're moving to data usage memorandums of understanding so that everybody understands consistently across the organization how data is going to be retained, how it's going to be stored, and how it's going to be utilized and governed to try to mitigate that risk.
Jim?
I disagree with Jack. It's a
That's
huge
great.
headache. It's a huge headache for information security folks. It's just more to protect with the same amount of people, same amount of tools, and it's more complex with compliance like GDPR and some of the state regulations that have come to bear. So, yeah, unless it's a security operations center where you're getting a lot of threat feeds, producing artificial intelligence to stop the malware, more data is more headache to me.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I guess in terms of, again, going back to how do you manage this vendor fragmentation, the fact that there will be a new attack tomorrow, and then there won't be a cookie-cutter solution around it. So you will have to find a new vendor who's helping you tackle that kind of threat. Do you allocate budget to that just because it is a risk, you know about it? You can't just let it be like that, you have to do something about it. Are you able to find extra budget for that new type of attack that you read in the newspaper, or your a peer is telling you, or you cut somewhere and then you allocate it to something new? What's the general thought process like?
It's more of a shift of budget. You're not just getting truckloads of money backed up to you, as most of these CFOs know. So, yeah, it's usually a shift of money, whether it's a shift from next-gen firewalls to multi-factor authentication to, it just depends on the newest and greatest threats that are showing up.
And how do you keep yourself apprised of the newest and greatest threats out there?
Industry organizations such as InfraGard, which is based, the FBI sponsors that, ISSA. For myself, it's a CISO forum within the hospitality industry. So we're all talking, and I'd say to one of your questions earlier, the more we've talked and the more we've gotten to know each other over the years, the more open people are for sharing. Which is really beneficial.
And Jeanette, I guess there are certain solutions in the industry that, I can think of databases. You don't get fired for, using an Oracle database. Are there any other solutions in security that, you probably have to use, that you won't get fired if you're using that, even if there is a hack, just because it's a standard, you know, and everybody is using it out there?
I think the space is moving so quickly and the vendors are migrating into the space so quickly that I'm not sure actually those types of gold standard exist yet. It's advancing so quickly.
Okay.
Just to give you a frame of reference, there are 4,000 startups in the cybersecurity world. I would say probably, 3,500 of them are features parading as companies that should be part of today's, product sets. So it's very hard as a buyer of technology. I can't imagine walking through as a CISO or a CFO and everybody says the same thing. Who you choose is very difficult. So I think it's more about word of mouth. I think the ISACs that the information sharing, there's an FS ISAC for financial services. There are a lot of other ISACs that you can, it's really your peer groups that you can talk to about the right technologies. But I agree with you, there's not a panacea at all.
I would mention one more thing. If you're operating in a large company but it's very decentralized in nature, there are a lot of good SMB products out there in the security space. So you don't necessarily have to pick the top company in the top right part of the Gartner quadrant. There are a lot of challenger type companies that are half the price that some of the big players are, where you don't need all the bells and whistles. So as a CFO, I challenge my information security group to go back and look at some of the other products that are available.
And so I guess just on that point, how much time do you spend evaluating different products? And has that time gone up? I mean, I'm sure you've been doing this for a while, and 2 years back, security threats weren't talked about in such a big way, or maybe 5 years back. But now it's like I said, a boardroom discussion. So are you spending more time upfront to evaluate these products before you say, okay, I'm going to go with this?
Yeah, certainly, it's not a easy venture to implement and deploy these products globally if you're with a global firm. So the more time you spend up front, the more time you're going to save on the back end. And we never want to be the guinea pigs, be the first to market. So we're always talking to our peers to see how things are operating and did they deploy okay? Are they accomplishing the objectives that were set out to be? And the communication piece with your peers is very important for that.
And Jeanette, in your case, have you seen a kind of shift in allocation between on-premise security products and cloud security products? Has that changed over time?
Our entire focus is shifting to cloud products. Automatically, things in the cloud are more secure. They provide that. They're in the business of providing security. So we have a significant effort of migrating applications to the cloud, and most of the solutions we select are cloud products.
Great. And Jack, from your perspective, do you see a steady upsell in your customer base when you are able to retain a customer? Do you see the spend go up from that customer because they are using your product more effectively, or they're adding more seats? How do customers kind of commit to your product for the long term?
So as a company, we've focused on medium and large enterprise, which means that we're less of a transactional sale and more of a what I would call relationship. So it's more about understanding where Jim and Jeanette would want to take their plan over time and build a program that allows them to buy the technology, implement the technology, and continue to evolve it. And I think that, it's not only our technology, but it's also the technology you've already spent money on that you want to integrate and get the most out of a broader solution. So whether you're connecting it back to ticketing systems to get remediations done, or you're bringing in threat data from other places, you want to make sure that all works well and to the plan. So.
And really quick, rapid fire, what keeps you up at night, Jim? From a CISO perspective. From a CISO perspective.
Wow, nice question to wrap it up.
From a CISO perspective, yeah.
We'll go with something information security related. I'd say, it's just the sophistication of the threat actors and the amount of money and the way they're funded versus the individual companies. You just know that Well, most companies know that no matter how much money you spend to protect your environment, if somebody wanted to access your data, they're going to. Yeah, so I mean, that's kind of disheartening, and especially when you go to the meetings at InfraGard and you listen to some of the FBI agents talk about the new threats that are out there. You just got to shake your head, and you almost leave depressed at times because it seems like an uphill battle, but it's a fascinating field and a fun one.
Jeanette, you?
Data breach, for sure. The actors out there, to your point, are getting more sophisticated. What used to be hackers were, 16-year-olds that were having fun and could prove that they hacked. And people are sophisticated now. They're actually well-funded. They have backing, and they want to steal your data, and they want to get your information, and they want to get money. So that's what keeps me up.
And for you, Jack, the product guy?
We recently went public this summer, and what fascinated me was that when we were broadening our board, and the law firm sent over, you set up the committees, your nom-gov, your compensation, and your audit committee, and in all of the charters, nothing was there about cyber risk, and there's people are not thinking, and being a cyber company, we made the conscious choice to think about what committee would that fall under, and I think that governance and this world of the boards looking like, am I secure or not? There needs to be oversight, especially for the public companies out there, and I think that's one of the things that concern me. I think, yes, a data breach is huge, and it would be devastating for a security vendor. But I do think that there's hope on as long as you keep your cyber hygiene, there's less to worry about if you're patching and configuring things correctly.
Great. Unfortunately, that's all the time we had. I want to thank our panelists. And yeah.